From the outside, my life was the kind people post about on Facebook. #blessed. I had a steady job as a senior software engineer at Axion Dynamics, a Silicon Valley darling known for developing AI-driven platforms for healthcare. I'd been with them for 12 years, climbing my way from a cubicle-dwelling code monkey to a project lead. My salary put us squarely in the upper-middle-class bracket, and our home in San Mateo, California, was a two-story craftsman with a red door and a backyard big enough for my kids, Aiden and Sophie, to kick a soccer ball around. My wife, Laura, was the heart of it all. She taught third grade at Willow Ridge Elementary, where parents sang her praises and kids adored her. She was the kind of person who always remembered birthdays and brought cupcakes to every school event. I used to joke that she had the energy of 3 people, and honestly, she did. We'd been married 15 years. Not without challenges, of course. We weren't those picture-perfect couples on TV, but we worked. At least, I thought we did. It started small. Laura had always been a little glued to her phone, texting friends, scrolling Pinterest for lesson ideas, or watching YouTube videos on creative classroom hacks. But lately, there was something different. She'd laugh, this quiet, private laugh, at messages. And when I'd come close to look at whatever it was, she'd click off the screen so fast, you'd think I'd walked in on her committing a crime. "Who's so funny?" I asked once, leaning over her shoulder as she sat on the couch. "Just Megan," she replied, her tone too casual, her smile a little too tight. Megan, Laura's best friend. They'd been inseparable since their college days at UCLA, and she was around so often that I sometimes joked she was our unofficial third child. Megan wasn't someone you'd forget. Tall, impeccably dressed, and always smelling faintly of designer perfume. She worked for a luxury retail company and had a sharp tongue that could slice through you if you weren't careful. Laura loved her. I didn't. But even Megan's frequent texts didn't explain the other shifts in Laura's behavior. The late-night phone calls, muffled giggles from our bedroom when she thought I was asleep. The sudden meetings after school that kept her out past dinner. Once, when I asked if she wanted me to wait up for her, she snapped, "You don't need to babysit me, Ryan." It stung. One night, I woke up thirsty and went downstairs to grab a glass of water. On my way back, I noticed a faint glow under the crack of the office door. I pushed it open a little, and there was Laura, sitting at my desk, her laptop open. Her face was lit by the screen as she typed furiously. I didn't mean to startle her, but I did. She slammed the laptop shut and whipped around. "Jesus, Ryan, you scared me. Didn't know I had to knock in my own house," I said, half joking. "What's up? You couldn't sleep?" "Just lesson plans," she said, waving me off. "Go back to bed." But the tension in her voice gave her away. I should have pressed, but I didn't. I walked out of the room, heart heavy with questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday, I found myself sitting across from Megan at a coffee shop in downtown Palo Alto, the kind of place with oat milk as the default and cappuccinos served in ceramic cups that looked more like flower pots. Megan had her hair in a sleek ponytail and wore a navy blazer with gold buttons. Her Prada bag sat on the chair beside her, like an uninvited guest. "Why are you here, Ryan?" she asked, cutting straight to the point as she stirred her matcha latte. Her tone was suspicious, her eyes sharp. "I need your help," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt.
"With what?"
I hesitated. Then I went for it. "I think Laura's hiding something. Maybe someone." Her eyebrows shot up, and she leaned back in her chair. "Wow, that's heavy. And you're coming to me for, what? An intervention? Because I'm not great at the whole comfort and tissues thing." "No," I said quickly. "I just need you to keep an eye on her. Let me know if you see anything off." "Off?" she repeated, giving me a pointed look. "Ryan, you're asking me to spy on my best friend. Do you hear how insane that sounds?" "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate," I admitted. "I don't have anyone else I can trust with this." She didn't respond right away, just stared at me with those calculating eyes of hers. Then she said, "This isn't about trust. It's about money." I blinked.
"What?"
She smirked. "If I'm going to sell out my best friend, it's not going to be for free. Do you know how much I owe on my Amex right now? I'm not doing this for charity." I didn't even hesitate. "How much?" 2,000. I'll give you 4. Her smirk vanished. You're serious? As a heart attack. She took a sip of her latte. Her lips pursed in thought. Then she nodded, almost reluctantly. Fine. But this stays between us. If Laura finds out, you're not just paying me. You're paying for my funeral. We agreed Megan would casually suggest a weekend shopping trip to Union Square in San Francisco, where Laura loved to browse boutiques. Megan would take the opportunity to get close, look for any signs, flirty texts, mysterious phone calls, or slips in conversation. She promised to report back the following Monday. When I got home that evening, Laura was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She looked up as I entered and smiled. A smile that felt practiced, like it had been pulled from a shelf and dusted off. "Where were you all afternoon?" she asked, her tone light. "Just running errands," I said, forcing a smile back. As I watched her sauté onions, humming softly to herself, I felt a strange mix of guilt and resolve. I didn't want to believe she was lying to me. I wanted Megan to come back with nothing, to tell me I was being paranoid. But deep down, a part of me was bracing for the worst. I'll admit it, working with Megan felt like hiring a fox to guard the henhouse. She wasn't exactly someone you'd call trustworthy, but I didn't have anyone else, and honestly, I was desperate. If my marriage was crumbling, I needed answers, and Megan seemed eager enough to dig them up. For a price, of course. The first time I handed Megan money, she grinned like she'd won the lottery. "Relax, Ryan," she said as she stuffed the cash into her Prada wallet. "You'll get your money's worth. Trust me." Trust her? Yeah, right. But I didn't have a choice. True to her word, Megan dove right in. She started showing up at Laura's school more often, popping by with coffee or stopping for a girl talk. Laura never suspected anything. Megan had been her best friend for over a decade. Why would she? I, on the other hand, was a nervous wreck. Every time Megan texted me, my stomach dropped. What was she going to say? What had she found? I hated this arrangement, but the thought of not knowing was worse. Megan's first few updates were vague. "She's leaving work early sometimes," Megan said over the phone one night. Not by much, but enough to notice. "Where's she going?" I asked. "Not sure yet," she replied. "It's hard to tail someone in broad daylight without looking suspicious. If you want me to get closer, I'll need more time. And more funds." That was Megan's thing. Always pushing for more. More time, more money, more drama. It annoyed me, but I kept paying her. I had to know. A week later, Megan called again. This time, her tone was different. Serious, almost smug. "She's been meeting someone." The words hit me like a gut punch. "Who?" "I don't know his name yet," she said, "but they're definitely not just friends. They had coffee the other day at this little cafe in Redwood City." She looked happy. Giggly. My mind raced. Happy? Giggly? Laura barely even smiled around me anymore. "Daniel," she said flatly. I felt the blood drain from my face. That doesn't make any sense. Daniel's broke. He doesn't even live around here anymore. "Apparently, he does now," Megan said. "He's been staying in Redwood City, working odd jobs. They've been meeting at this diner off El Camino. Real low-key." My chest tightened. Daniel Prescott. My college buddy. My best man. He'd been a fixture in my life for years. The kind of guy who always seemed to be in a tough spot, but never let it bother him. I hadn't seen him in over a year. The last time we talked, he was bouncing between warehouse gigs and trying to save up for a better car. I never thought I'd be betrayed by someone like Daniel Prescott. He wasn't wealthy, successful, or even particularly ambitious. He was just Daniel, the guy I'd known since college, the guy who'd lived paycheck to paycheck and borrowed my couch when he was between apartments, the guy I never saw as a threat, until Megan said his name. What could she possibly see in him? I muttered. "Maybe it's not about what he has," Megan said. "Maybe it's about how he makes her feel." The next blow came when Megan followed Laura after work. "She went to the Crescent Inn," Megan said over the phone. Her voice clipped. "A motel?" "Yes," she replied. "With Daniel." I clenched my fists. "How do you know?" "I saw them," she said. "They went into room 108. Stayed there for an hour. I watched the whole thing. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Daniel wasn't some stranger. He was a part of my past, someone I trusted. The betrayal cut even deeper because of who he was. I'm sorry, Ryan, Megan said, her voice unusually soft. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. As if the motel wasn't enough, Megan had more to say. You know, she said, almost hesitantly, Laura's talked about Daniel before. She told me once that he was her first crush. What? Yeah, Megan said. She said it was harmless. Something from way back in college. But now? She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I felt sick. Had Laura been harboring feelings for Daniel all this time? Had she settled for me because I was the stable choice? Megan wasn't done stirring the pot. You ever think about Aiden? She asked one night. What about him? I mean, he doesn't really look like you, does he? Megan's voice was light, like she was making an innocent observation, but I knew better. I bristled. He's my son, Megan. I'm just saying, she said. He's got dark eyes, just like Daniel. And that smile? Dead ringer. That's enough, I snapped. But the damage was done. That night, I couldn't stop staring at Aiden's face, trying to convince myself Megan was wrong. But once the doubt was there, it wouldn't go away. By the end of the week, I'd ordered DNA kits online. I told myself it was just to quiet Megan's voice in my head, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. Getting Daniel's DNA was easier than I expected, and harder than I'd like to admit. Once Megan revealed that Laura had been meeting Daniel, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The man I'd trusted like a brother, my college roommate, and my best man, now sneaking around with my wife. I couldn't wrap my head around it. But when Megan suggested that Aiden might not be mine, it forced me into a darker corner of my thoughts. Daniel wasn't hard to track down. Megan kept tabs on him for me, following him to his favorite hangouts, a dive bar on El Camino Real, a coffee shop near the warehouse where he worked odd jobs. I hadn't seen him in over a year, but the moment I spotted him again, slouched over a booth with a beer in hand, I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I ordered a drink and waited until he went to the bathroom, leaving his nearly empty glass on the table. My hands were sweating as I slid out of my seat and made my way to his booth. Glancing around to make sure no one was watching, I grabbed the glass and stuffed it into a plastic bag I'd hidden in my jacket pocket. It felt ridiculous, like I was starring in some low-budget spy movie, but it worked. Later that night, I called Megan to tell her what I'd done. You're insane, she said, laughing when I explained. But honestly, I'm impressed. I didn't think you had it in you. It's not about guts, I snapped. It's about getting the truth. Well, she said, still chuckling, good luck. And don't forget to tell me when the results come in. I'll bring popcorn. When the kits arrived, I called Aiden and Sophie into the kitchen. It's for a school project, I lied, holding up the swabs. We're learning about genetics. They didn't question it. Aiden even laughed, saying, cool. Does this mean I'll know if I'm related to someone famous? I forced a smile and swabbed their cheeks, pretending my hands weren't shaking. The next day, I sent Daniel's DNA, swabbed from the rim of the glass, off to the same lab I'd used for Aiden and Sophie's tests. It felt surreal, walking into the post office with an envelope that could shatter what was left of my family. But I needed to know. I told myself it was for closure, for clarity. But deep down, I knew it was about something darker, revenge. If Daniel was Aiden's father, then Laura hadn't just betrayed me. She destroyed everything I thought we built together. Waiting for the results was excruciating. Every time Laura smiled at me or kissed me on the cheek, I felt like a fraud. And every time I looked at Aiden, I couldn't help but wonder, Asterisk, are you really mine? Or have I been raising someone else's child all these years? Asterisk. The answers were coming, and I wasn't sure I was ready for them. The email with Daniel's DNA test results came in late at night. My hands shook as I clicked it open. I knew what I was about to see, but somehow I still hoped I was wrong. There it was, spelled out in cold, clinical terms. Aiden Carter is a 99.9% biological match with Daniel Prescott. I closed my eyes, leaning back in my chair. My worst fear had been confirmed. Aiden wasn't my son. He was Daniel's. Then there was Sophie. Her results were baffling. No match for Ryan Carter or Daniel Prescott. I stared at the screen, trying to process what that meant. If Sophie wasn't mine, and she wasn't Daniel's, then whose child was she? The questions burned in my mind, but the rage outweighed the confusion. Laura had betrayed me in more ways than I thought possible. When I called Megan to tell her, she reacted exactly how I'd expected. "Well, damn," she said, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. I didn't want to believe it either, but hey, at least now you know the truth. I stayed silent, gripping the phone tightly as she continued. "Honestly, Ryan, this is the kind of mess that makes reality TV look boring. What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. The plan was already forming in my head, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud. "Let me guess," Megan said, her voice laced with glee. "You're going to wait for the perfect moment to drop the bomb, aren't you? Ooh, what about her birthday? That would be chef's kiss perfect." Her suggestion hit me like lightning. Laura's 40th birthday was only weeks away. "You're right," I said slowly. "Her birthday." Megan laughed. "This is going to be a party to remember." Planning the party was surreal. Laura thought I was doing something sweet and thoughtful, and in a way, I was. But the sweetness had a bitter edge. This wasn't just a celebration. It was a reckoning. I invited everyone important to Laura, her parents, her close friends, and even Daniel. "Daniel?" she asked when she saw his name on the guest list. "Of course," I said with a smile. "He's been a part of our lives for years." She didn't argue, just nodded, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. Megan, naturally, insisted on helping with the preparations. "You need me there to back you up," she said, her grin borderline sadistic. "Besides, someone's gotta make sure Laura gets what's coming to her." She handled the decorations, booked the private room at La Bella Vita, an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown San Mateo, and even ordered a cake with "Happy 40th, Laura" scrawled across the top in gold icing. "This party is going to be iconic," Megan said one night as we went over final details. I didn't answer. The weight of what I was about to do was starting to settle in, but there was no turning back now. The night of the party, everything was perfect. The private room was decorated in gold and lavender, Laura's favorite colors. She arrived in a sleek black dress, smiling and hugging everyone, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I played the role of the doting husband, making sure everything went smoothly. Even Daniel showed up, wearing a rumpled button-up shirt that screamed last-minute effort. When dinner was over and the cake was being served, I tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate Laura's milestone birthday," I began, my voice steady. "She's been my partner, my rock, and the mother of our children." Laura smiled, her cheeks flushing as the room clapped. "But tonight isn't just about celebrating Laura," I continued, my tone shifting. "It's also about truth, about honesty." Laura's smile faltered, confusion flickering in her eyes. I reached for the folder I'd placed under my chair and laid it on the table. "Laura, there are things I've recently discovered that I think everyone here deserves to know." Her face went pale. "Ryan, what are you doing?" I ignored her. Opening the folder, I pulled out the first photo, Laura and Daniel walking into the Crescent Inn. "This," I said, holding it up for everyone to see, "is my wife and my supposed best friend. They've been meeting at this motel for months." Gasps filled the room. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face turning bright red. "Ryan, stop," Laura pleaded, her voice trembling. I wasn't finished. I pulled out another document, the DNA test results. "And this," I said, holding up the papers, "is proof that Aiden isn't my son. He's Daniel's." Laura's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The room erupted into chaos. Her parents looked horrified, her friends whispered to each other, and Daniel stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "And Sophie?" I added, my voice breaking. "She's not mine either. And she's not Daniel's. So, Laura, why don't you tell us who her father is?" She sobbed, shaking her head. "Ryan, please. Answer me," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. But she couldn't, or wouldn't. Through it all, Megan sat back, sipping her wine and watching the chaos unfold like it was her favorite show. "Well, Laura," she said with a smirk, "didn't expect this party to go off script, did you?" "Shut up, Megan," Laura snapped, her voice breaking. "Oh, I'm just here for support," Megan replied, feigning innocence. "You know, for Ryan. Because someone has to have his back." I left before the party ended. I didn't need to hear Laura's excuses or watch Daniel try to slink out unnoticed. Megan called me later that night, giddy with excitement. "That was better than I imagined," she said, laughing. "You really blew the roof off that one." But I didn't feel triumphant. All I felt was empty. Laura had destroyed our family, and Daniel had stabbed me in the back. But standing in the wreckage, I couldn't help but wonder, was the truth worth it? There was no going back now. The party had been the spark, and the explosion came fast and hard. Word of Laura's betrayal spread like wildfire through our suburban community. By the end of the week, the whispers had turned into full-blown gossip. Parents at Willow Ridge Elementary, many of whom had been Laura's staunchest supporters, began to question her character. "How can someone like that teach our kids?" one parent reportedly said at a PTA meeting. The pressure mounted until Laura had no choice but to resign. She claimed it was a personal decision, but everyone knew the truth. Colleagues stopped calling, friends stopped visiting, and even casual acquaintances avoided her at the grocery store. Her fall from grace was swift and brutal, but it wasn't over yet. Daniel's life unraveled just as quickly. His wife, Teresa, packed her bags and left within days of learning the truth. She didn't bother with a dramatic confrontation, just a curt note and a lawyer's business card on the kitchen counter. Without his family to ground him, Daniel spiraled. He lost his job at the warehouse after showing up drunk too many times, and his evenings became a blur of cheap whiskey and regret. Laura, now jobless and financially dependent on Daniel, moved in with him. But their relationship quickly turned toxic. Daniel's frustration and self-loathing turned into anger, and Laura bore the brunt of it. Neighbors reported shouting matches and slammed doors. On more than one occasion, the police were called to their small apartment. The irony wasn't lost on me. The two people who had destroyed my life were now destroying each other. Meanwhile, I focused on my children. The DNA results might have said Aiden wasn't biologically mine, but that didn't change how I felt about him, or Sophie. They were my kids, and I would do everything in my power to protect them. I filed for divorce immediately, ensuring Laura would get as little as possible. My lawyer, a shark of a woman named Monica Reyes, made sure of it. She forfeited any claim to spousal support the moment she stepped into that motel, Monica said, her voice as sharp as her tailored suits. The court agreed. The house was mine, the savings were mine, and Laura was left with nothing but the mess she'd created. To safeguard my kids' futures, I set up independent trust funds for Aiden and Sophie. The accounts were untouchable, even by me, ensuring they'd always have a financial safety net no matter what. Megan, true to form, distanced herself from Laura entirely. "I can't be associated with this mess. It's bad for my image," she said when I asked. "Besides, I only helped you for closure, not to babysit your ex-wife." With the divorce finalized and the chaos behind me, I began to think about my next step. The thought of staying in San Mateo, surrounded by memories of betrayal, was unbearable. When my company offered me a high-ranking position in Dubai, I didn't hesitate. Dubai was everything San Mateo wasn't: vibrant, fast-paced, and full of opportunities. The move was a clean slate, and I intended to make the most of it. Within a year, I decided to take a leap of faith and launch my own software company. Leveraging my expertise and connections, I built Carter Solutions, a tech firm specializing in AI-driven healthcare systems. The company grew faster than I'd ever imagined, and within 5 years, we were a global leader in the industry. It was in Dubai that I met Amira. She wasn't flashy or dramatic like Laura. Amira was kind, intelligent, and grounded, a refreshing change from everything I'd known. We met at a tech conference, bonding over a shared love of problem-solving and a mutual disdain for corporate buzzwords. What started as casual conversations over coffee quickly turned into something deeper. Amira restored my faith in love, showing me that relationships didn't have to be built on secrets or lies. We married 2 years later in a small, intimate ceremony overlooking the Persian Gulf. Aiden and Sophie were there, standing by my side as I said my vows. Together, Amira and I began building a life, a real one, founded on trust and respect. The scars of my past never fully faded, but they no longer defined me. I'd built something new from the ashes of my old life, a thriving career, a loving family, and a future full of possibilities. As I stood on the balcony of our Dubai home one evening, watching the city lights glitter like stars, I realized something important. Laura and Daniel might have taken my past, but they could never touch my future. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. I hadn't planned on returning to the U.S. My life in Dubai was thriving. Carter Solutions had become a global powerhouse. My marriage to Amira was solid, and I'd finally found peace. But when a prestigious job opportunity came up back in the States, I couldn't ignore the pull. It wasn't just the job, though. Deep down, I knew why I felt compelled to go back. Aiden and Sophie. Though I video called them regularly and visited during holidays, I couldn't shake the feeling that distance wasn't enough. A father's intuition, I guess. Are you sure about this? Amira asked one evening, her hand resting on my arm. I'm not, I admitted. But they're my kids. I need to be there for them. She smiled, her calm reassurance steadying me as always. Then we'll go together. We'll make it work. Returning to San Mateo felt strange, like stepping into a ghost town of old memories. The streets were the same, but everything else had changed, or maybe I had. I'd arranged for Aiden and Sophie to live with me part-time, splitting their weeks between my house and Laura's dingy apartment on the other side of town. When I picked them up for the first time, I noticed the changes immediately. Aiden, now 16, had grown tall and broad-shouldered, his features resembling Daniel's more than I cared to admit. But his demeanor was thoughtful, his grades excellent, and he seemed determined to carve out a better future for himself. Hey, Dad, he said as he climbed into the car, his voice deeper than I remembered. Good to see you. Good to see you too, bud, I replied, my chest swelling with pride. Sophie, on the other hand, was another story. At 14, she was all attitude, slouched in the back seat with her earbuds in, refusing to make eye contact. Hi, Sophie, I said gently. Whatever, she muttered, staring out the window. Over the next few weeks, I started to piece together what had been happening while I was away. Aiden was responsible and driven, taking advanced classes and volunteering at the local animal shelter. But Sophie? She was spiraling. It started with small things, staying out late, skipping homework, snapping at me or Amira when we asked about her day. Then, one evening, I got a call from the school principal. Sophie was caught with alcohol on school grounds, he said bluntly. This is a serious issue, Mr. Carter. I suggest you come in for a meeting. My heart sank. The meeting was uncomfortable, to say the least. Sophie sat in the corner, arms crossed, glaring at the floor while the principal explained how she and a group of friends had been caught drinking behind the gym. That's not all, he added, lowering his voice. There have been rumors about drug use. We haven't found anything concrete, but I thought you should know. That night, I confronted Sophie in the living room. What's going on with you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing, she shot back, rolling her eyes. This isn't nothing, I said, holding up the letter from the principal. You're drinking at school, hanging out with kids who are a bad influence. What are you thinking? She shrugged, her defiance infuriating me. Why do you care? You left. You weren't here. Her words hit me like a slap. That's not fair, I said, struggling to stay calm. I've always been here for you, even if I wasn't physically here. I've done everything I can to support you. Yeah, well, maybe you should have done more, she snapped before storming upstairs and slamming her door. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how to reach her. Amira, ever the voice of reason, suggested therapy. She's angry, Ryan, she said. She feels abandoned, and she's acting out. You need to show her that you're not going anywhere. I took her advice, enrolling Sophie in counseling and signing us up for family therapy sessions. At first, she refused to go, but after a particularly heated argument, she relented. The sessions were tough. Sophie's anger was raw and unfiltered, and hearing her say things like, I feel like I don't matter to you, broke my heart. But slowly, progress was made. She opened up about the pressure of living in Aiden's shadow, the confusion about her biological father, and her resentment toward me for leaving, even if it was for a better life. One night, months later, Sophie came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up. "Hey, Dad," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "Hey," I replied, trying to mask my surprise. "I'm sorry," she said, her eyes welling up. "For everything. For being such a jerk." I set the dish towel down and pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry too, Sophie. I should have been here sooner." It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a start. Over time, things began to improve. Sophie dropped the bad influences, focused on her grades, and even joined the school's theater club. Aiden continued to excel, eventually applying to colleges with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Through it all, Amira was my rock. She helped me navigate the tricky balance of parenting, offering support and love when I needed it most. Returning to the U.S. had been difficult, but it gave me the chance to repair what I thought was broken beyond saving. I'd lost so much in the past, but standing in my kitchen, watching my kids laugh together over a silly joke, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I'd been given a second chance, and this time, I wasn't going to waste it. It was late one evening when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. "Ryan," came a shaky voice. It took me a moment to register who it was. "Laura." Her voice was hollow, the bravado and self-assurance I remembered long gone. "I didn't know who else to call," she said, her words rushed and desperate. I need help." I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone tightly. "Help?" I repeated. "You're calling me for help?" She broke down, sobbing into the receiver. Between gasps, she told me about her life with Daniel. After his wife, Teresa, left, Daniel had spiraled deeper into alcoholism. He was volatile and abusive, and Laura had become his primary target. "I can't leave Ryan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have a job, no savings. I don't know what to do." Her words might have moved me once, but not anymore. "You made your choices, Laura," I said coldly. "You chose Daniel. You chose to destroy our family. And now you want me to clean up the mess?" "Ryan, please," she begged. "For the kids' sake." I clenched my jaw. "The kids are fine. They're thriving. They don't need you dragging them down with your problems." There was a long silence before she whispered, "I'm sorry. For everything." Her apology didn't mean much anymore. "I hope you figure things out," I said before hanging up. One night, I got a call from Megan, of all people. "Have you heard about Daniel?" she asked, her voice unusually serious. "No," I said, a mix of curiosity and dread rising in my chest. "He's in the hospital," she said bluntly. "Apparently, he got into a bar fight. Broken nose, fractured ribs, the whole 9 yards." I didn't feel pity. If anything, I felt relief knowing that I distanced myself from the wreckage that Daniel and Laura had become. While Laura and Daniel's lives spiraled downward, mine was moving in the opposite direction. Amira and I poured everything we had into creating a stable, loving home for Aiden and Sophie. Aiden flourished under the structure and support we provided. He took up internships at local veterinary clinics and was accepted into UC Davis, one of the best veterinary programs in the country. Sophie's transformation was even more remarkable. The rebellious, angry teenager I'd come back to was gone. Therapy had helped her unpack her feelings of abandonment and resentment, and she'd found an outlet in her school's theater program. She smiled more, laughed more, and even started talking about pursuing a career in the arts. Watching them grow closer to Amira filled me with gratitude. She didn't just step into their lives. She became a pillar of strength and warmth for them. They trusted her, and in many ways, she became the mother figure they desperately needed. One night, as we all sat around the dinner table, Sophie looked at Amira and said, "I don't know what we'd do without you." Amira smiled, her eyes misting. "I'm just happy to be here for you." Professionally, my return to the U.S. brought new opportunities. Carter Solutions expanded into the American market, and I spearheaded projects that revitalized local industries, particularly in San Mateo. We developed AI-driven tools for logistics, creating hundreds of jobs in the area. I became a familiar face in the community, not just as a businessman, but as someone who cared about giving back. I sponsored scholarships for underprivileged kids, donated to local schools, and spoke at town halls about the importance of investing in the next generation. Even those who had once gossiped about my divorce and Laura's infidelity began to see me in a different light. Despite my refusal to help her, Laura tried again a few months later. She showed up at my office unannounced, looking gaunt and frail. "Ryan, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Just give me enough to get out of this mess. I can't stay with him anymore." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the broken woman in front of me with the Laura I once knew. "You need to take responsibility for your life," I said firmly. "I'm not your safety net anymore." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." "That's not my problem," I said, my voice colder than I expected. "It hasn't been for a long time." By the time Laura left, I felt no guilt, only a sense of finality. I'd done what I could for my children, and that was enough. "Daniel?" He continued his downward spiral, eventually leaving town to stay with a distant relative in Oregon. I never heard from him again, and I didn't care to. Aiden and Sophie, on the other hand, were my legacy. As they grew into remarkable young adults, I knew I'd made the right choices. Standing in the kitchen one evening, watching Amira laugh with Sophie while Aiden shared stories from his internship, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I couldn't change the past, but I'd built a future worth living for. That was redemption enough. Years had passed, and life had finally settled into something I could call peaceful. Aiden was thriving at UC Davis, excelling in his veterinary program. He'd call me every week to share stories about his classes or the animals he was caring for. "Thanks for everything, Dad," he said one evening over the phone. "I wouldn't be here without you." I smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat. "You've done the hard work, Aiden. I'm just proud to be part of the journey." Sophie had grown into a confident, creative young woman. She'd been accepted into a prestigious theater program in New York City and was preparing to leave for her first semester. "Dad," she said the night before her flight, "I know you're not my biological father, but you're the only dad I've ever known, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." Her words meant everything to me. I hugged her tightly, feeling both pride and sadness as I realized how far we'd come. But there was one question Sophie couldn't let go of: who her biological father was. "I need to know, Dad," she said one night, her voice tinged with hesitation. "Not because it changes how I feel about you. I just need to understand where I came from." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't something I could answer. "Have you talked to your mom about this?" I asked. Sophie nodded. "She won't tell me anything. She just shuts me down." "Maybe you should try again," I said gently. "It's your right to know." The next day, Sophie called Laura. I wasn't in the room when the conversation happened, but I saw the tension in Sophie's face when she hung up. "What did she say?" I asked cautiously. Sophie sighed, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. She admitted it. She said she had another affair, years ago, with some guy she met at a conference. I sat down beside her, waiting for her to continue. "He died, Dad," Sophie said, her voice cracking. She didn't even know his name at first. She only found out later that he passed away in some accident. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? The truth Sophie had been searching for was tragic and hollow. She leaned against me, her tears soaking into my shirt. "I just feel lost." "You're not lost, Sophie," I said, wrapping my arm around her. "You're here. And no matter what, you'll always have a family." She nodded, clutching me tighter. A year after Sophie left for New York, Amira and I sat on the balcony of our home, watching the sun set over the bay. Life was good, better than I ever could have imagined. As I sipped my tea, Amira reached for my hand. "Ryan," she said, her eyes sparkling, "there's something I need to tell you." I turned to her, curious. "I'm pregnant," she said, a smile spreading across her face. For a moment, I was speechless. Then I laughed, pulling her into a hug. "We're going to have a baby," I said, the words feeling almost surreal. She nodded, her smile widening. A fresh start. A new chapter. As I held her, I thought about everything it had taken to get to this moment. The heartbreak, the betrayals, the painful choices. But in that moment, none of it mattered. I had a family, a real one. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly whole. If you were in Ryan's shoes, Would you have gone to the lengths he did to uncover the truth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to Cheating Storytelling so you never miss an update on more real-life stories. And as always, see you in the next video.